Today, I'm going to be talking about the dark side of feminism. Yeah. And the thing is, no one's apparently allowed to talk about this because if you do talk about this, you talk about anything negative or critique of feminism or against women, you are labeled as a misogynist. But don't take it from me because in this video, I'm going to cover the 10 dark sides of feminism, specifically from feminist authors like Phyllis Chesler, Christina Hoff Sommers, and Sheila Marston. Ooh, this is going to be a good one. All right, if you're new to my channel, welcome. My name is Kane. I'm the Silver Bachelor. This channel is 100% dedicated to dating advice for older guys and the women that want to understand them. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button because I'm dropping videos every week. Woo! Okay, let's get into this. The dark side of feminism, and do not even take my word for it. I'm going to give some examples, but I read all three of these books from these feminists, and they're the ones talking about the dark sides of feminism. And I want to hear from you in the comments what you think about the things that I'm going to cover. 10 things specifically on the dark sides of feminism. And these books that I read, one is called The Dark Side of Feminism by Phyllis Chesler. The other book is Who Stole Feminism by Christina Hoff Sommers, and The Feminist Lie by Sheila Marston. And Sheila Marston is the most quoted in this realm of critique against feminism. But let's just get right into this video. I've got a lot to cover. This is going to be one of my longer videos. I did a lot of research on this, and specifically, like I said, I'm going to get into the 10 things, the 10 dark sides of feminism that apparently nobody's allowed to talk about, but I'm talking about it right now. Okay, number one, feminism shifted from equality to ideology, all right? Early feminism focused on equal rights, which is amazing, by the way. However, modern feminism prioritizes political narratives over measurable outcomes. Okay, it's all about the politics behind it, but forget about the facts, forget about performance. So here's an example, the WNBA. Yeah, we're talking about that. So at one point, the Women's National Basketball Association, the women wore these t-shirts that said, "Pay us what you owe us," okay? So this is the attitude of a lot of feminists today. They're like, you owe us something, but yet they have not demonstrated to performance to owe anything. So you may not realize this. If you do, cool. Maybe you already know this, but the WNBA hasn't made any money. They've been a net negative, basically $50 million a year since they started for 30 years, basically. Okay. Now, that's no different, by the way, than the NBA. For those of you that don't know this, fun fact, the NBA made no money for the first 30 years. So you've got these two leagues that haven't made any money for the first 30 years. And it's only since Larry Bird and a few others around that time got into the NBA that they started, actually the league started making money. Another fun fact, the NBA players did not get 50% of the revenues from the league revenues and advertising and all this, 50% for 60 years. So they had to play another 30 years in order to get 50% revenue share. So here we have the WNBA, on the other hand, that hasn't made any money in 30 years. One of their demands, I'm not going to get into all the specifics, but one of their demands in most recent contract negotiations is they want 30% revenue share. And like I said, they haven't made any money as a league. They've been losing money as a league. And the NBA players didn't get 50% for 60 years. So they're 30 years ahead of themselves, the WNBA, by even having the audacity to ask for 30% revenue share. But this is an example of feminism, right? Feminism is all about the political narrative in this instance and not measurable outcomes, okay? This is the huge difference between men and women. Men are like, cool, yes, if I score 20 touchdowns in a year, you're going to pay me $5 million more a year. Awesome. I understand that, right? But feminists get all wrapped up in the political narrative. So this is, again, this is not coming from me. This is coming from the feminist authors that I mentioned, okay? So that's one of the things that they spoke about was the feminism has shifted from equality to now ideology. Number two, Women are framed only as victims. Oh, yeah, God. It's pathetic. I watch these TikTok videos all the time and women constantly playing the victim with crocodile tears, right? So, all three of these authors argue that feminism removes female accountability and distorts real human behavior, okay? For example, all right? And this isn't coming from me, gentlemen. This is coming from the Happy Wife School. The Happy Wife School is a YouTube channel, and it's a woman that is now divorced, and she talks about all the things that wives do wrong in a marriage, basically. Okay? So, 70% of all divorces are filed by women. And that percentage goes up to 90% if the woman is college educated. That is insane. So the Happy Wife School explains, well, why is that? Why is it that 70% of divorces are filed by women and it goes up to 90% if they're college educated? And she says it's because, this is coming from her, she says it's because women are selfish. They don't want to accept responsibility for their fuck ups. They don't care that there's now two people in the relationship and they have to compromise, because why would you compromise? Because I'm the woman and I'm always the victim, right? And even if you try to mention this statistic to feminists and you say, well, they're the ones messing up marriages, not the guys, they will say things like, well, it's because the guy didn't take out the garbage, or it's because the guy didn't fulfill my needs, or it's because I never really was into him. It's always an excuse. And so this is why number 2 point that those authors share is that number 2, that women are framed only as victims and they don't want to take accountability. Number 3, okay? Number 3 is feelings replaced facts. Feminist studies increasingly reject data in favor of a lived experience, okay? Ooh, so here's an example, all right, of how these studies are rejecting data in favor of a lived experience, okay? Many women will throw this out at you and say, well, women get paid 70 cents to the dollar. It's actually, in this instance, 82 cents, but I'll explain it. Or they'll say, women get paid less than men for the same job, okay? This is what they're saying out there. Well, here is the reality and the truth. And if you say this, you're going to be, you're going to be hushed and they're going to see you as misogynist, but facts are facts. First one, the 70 cents to the dollar, 82 cents to the dollar. Okay, how this came about, if you don't know, the wage gap. Okay, there is no wage gap, but let me explain this. They took all the jobs that women do and they got an average pay. They took all the jobs that men do and get an average pay. Well, of course, men make more than women if you take average jobs. It's because there's more men working in dangerous jobs, more scientific jobs, more environmentally disgusting jobs, more dangerous jobs, all these things, and those jobs pay more. So of course you get the average, and the average man is going to make more than a woman because more men are in all these other trades. So for example, oil rigs, they pay quite well. Well, an oil rig, only 5% on oil rigs are women. Only 5% of women are in the army. Only 15% of women are in the police force. Only 15% of women are in the fire department. I think it's 15%. It might be 5%. It doesn't matter. A low percentage, right? And so you get that's an example. You get construction, and women are not doing construction jobs, and those jobs pay more than social work, which, by the way, there's more women in college and graduating from college than there are men now, but they're choosing careers that don't pay that good. Why? Because the jobs, like I said, that pay the best tend to be on the more scientific side of things, more technical side of things, engineering, for example, or they're dangerous and they're risky, okay? So now going off to the same job, same 2 jobs, and a man makes more than a woman. So it's somewhat true that men will make 3 to 4% more in that job, the same job, versus a woman. But why is that? Well, here's why. Because only 34% of candidates actually negotiate a salary. 34%. And of that 34%, 48% are men, and there's 35% that are women. So there's a gap between who negotiates salaries when it comes to getting a job offer. And men are more apt to negotiate a salary versus women, which helps explain the 3 to 4% difference of the same job and a man makes a bit more. Also, most of these jobs that I'm talking about are the more managerial type jobs. And a lot of those jobs require you to travel for work or relocate. And more men than women are willing to travel for their work and relocate, which also contributes to that 3 to 4%. So is it really apples to apples? It is not apples to apples because of the differences between the man and the woman. One negotiates salaries and is more willing to travel and relocate for the job. So, right? So, but yet women will play the victim, like I've said, and that's a lot of feminists. Okay. So, number 4, disagreeing with women. If you disagree with women, you will be silenced. Oh, yeah, we see this all the time. Okay. And all 3 of these feminists challenge the narrative because the narrative says this: if you disagree with women in general, you are considered a traitor, or you're considered a misogynist, or you're considered pick-me's, whatever that is. It's a new term I found. So, but the misogynist, this is the big one that comes up a lot on my channel, on TikTok and on Instagram. And women are in the comments, and I just say one thing that this is in disagreement, especially with facts about women, but because it's perceived as negativity instead of a critique, I'm labeled as a misogynist. And by the way, the definition of misogynist has changed. Originally, that definition was the hatred of women. And now it includes anything. If you disagree with women, or you criticize a woman, or you say anything negative about a woman, it's misogyny. Okay, whatever. I don't care. So that's number 4, is disagreeing with women. You will be silenced. Number 5, female aggression is ignored or excused. I have a very interesting story to share about this. So these authors went on to say that women will abuse, they will manipulate, they will bully men, and they will minimalize or rationalize their aggression. So here's a perfect example of this. Imagine you're a Uber driver, all right? And you got 2 young women in the back. And all of a sudden, your ride gets canceled, and you're like 5 minutes from dropping them off. Bloop, 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 the ride gets canceled. Well, apparently this was a trend going on with people canceling rides and getting out of not paying for the ride, and they're only 10 minutes away so they can walk. So these 2 women decide to pull this on an Uber driver, and he turns around and says, did you just cancel my ride? And then, of course, you could see this whole video because he had the dash cam, and you could see the expressions on these women's faces. They totally canceled the ride because I looked at their facial expressions. They looked down on their phone, and all of a sudden he reacted, and they're like, oh, he's going to say something. So he asked them point blank, did you cancel the ride? Of course, they said no. Well, then the women started getting aggressive. They started saying things like, we feel unsafe, and I can't believe you're saying this, and this is borderline abuse, all these things, right? Bullying, manipulation, all right? Then the guy goes, you know what? The police station is just over here, and I'm pulling into the police station. But they still went at it instead of just being honest. But this is the nastiness of some of the feminists out there and what they are willing to do, and yet it's ignored or excused by a lot of people in society. So that's number 5, is female aggression. Number 6, men are treated as second class, preventing honest dialogue. Oh, yeah. So all 3 books, they argue that blaming men broadly kills cooperation and progress. Here are some examples, okay? Blaming men broadly, that all men are like this, okay? Example number 1. Well, women don't seem to think there's anything wrong with wearing those tight booty shorts in the gym, okay? They wear them, but yet if a man even dares look their side, their direction, even for a smidgen, and they're recording themselves, they're going to go to TikTok and Instagram and say, oh, look at these creeps. Oh, you see, I can't even go to the gym. Playing the victim all the time. And yet They're wearing this outfit and men can't help it. They look over, but even if they look over for a second, that's not good enough. Okay. So there's one thing. Another thing is one time on Facebook, this woman was going off about how, and okay, this is evil, how there were 70,000 men in a chat room trying to talk about how to are a woman. You know what I'm talking about, but I can't say the word on this channel. So trying to are a woman, that's awful and it's evil. The fact that you would have that many men on a chat room and who knows however many other chat rooms there are in society. Okay. So does it make all men evil? By the way, just quick side note that I researched this topic on that in terms of the word R and SA, R and SA, that 20 to 25% of women that have been studied and asked this question throughout their lifetime, that 20 to 25% of women have experienced some form of SA or R in their life. This is where it gets interesting. However, gay men, same study, gay men have cited that it's 40%. So 40% of gay men have experienced SA or R in their life, okay? So put all that aside. The reason why I said that is, let's just say it's 25% of men that have the potential or could SA or R a woman, okay? That means 75% of men are good men that would never do that. But yet you get this picture painted, this blank, this wide stroke against men, and that, oh, men, all men are like this, right? Just like when they say, I'd choose the bear instead of a man if I was alone in the forest. Well, here's something for you to think about, especially for the female viewers watching this. Think about this. There are some very evil people in the world that will want you dead for their religious reasons, okay? There are some nasty, nasty terrorists out there and evil people that will kill for their religious cause. Does it make everyone from that religion evil? It does not, okay? We're talking smaller percentages of the population that could do a lot of damage, yes, but does not mean the greater is evil. And that's what's happening right now with feminism, as they're painting men as these terrible beings on this earth. And that's not the case. Men are not evil overall. All right. So that's number 6. Number 7, modern feminism encourages adversarial relationships. So this is kind of a segue into from my previous point. The feminist mindset damages dating, marriage, and family stability. Okay. Here's some examples of this. When I hear on TikTok from interviews or Instagram, and the women are, if the person's interviewing a woman, he says, do we need men? And you'll hear so many women coming back and their answer is, nope, we don't need men. Forget men. Men are useless. Anything a man can do, a woman could do 10 times better. This is the kind of, excuse me, anger that exists out there. And those are the things that are being heard on interviews. So this is where modern feminism is going wrong. Number 8, sexual liberation didn't deliver fulfillment. So feminism promised happiness through freedom, but yet it actually led to higher anxiety and dissatisfaction. So think of all the OnlyFans models out there. Apparently 10% of all women are involved in some kind of sex work, okay? But they're dissatisfied. They're dissatisfied with the fact that nobody wants them. Like they can't hold down a legitimate relationship and that nobody wants to get married to them. Well, that's their own consequence. So this is one of the side consequences of feminism is women, okay, naturally, they don't want to feel bad or guilty for anything that they're going to do in life. But the flip side is now it's caused a lot of broken relationships. All right. So number 9, this is probably one of my favorite ones, which I'm going to take a minute to talk about this one. And that is power is framed as victimhood. Okay. So in this particular point, women focus on perceived oppression rather than competence. Okay, let me repeat that. Women in this particular example focus on perceived oppression rather than competence. For example, Kamala Harris. All right, let's talk about this for a minute. Feminists and a lot of women will say the reason why she lost is because America doesn't want a woman president or a woman of color. That's the mindset with a lot of these women voters that voted for Kamala Harris. But here's the truth, right? We all know there's layers behind why she lost, but it ultimately had nothing to do with the fact that she's a woman, let alone a woman of color. What it ultimately had to do with is the fact that she was not qualified to run a country or be president. Yep, I'm putting myself out there and I'm going to explain 5 points on how she wasn't qualified, okay? So here's the thing that ultimately gets me is everyone knows the saying, better the devil you know. But yet, a lot of women that have voted for Kamala Harris would choose ideology over one of the most basic principles of humanity, and that is better the devil you know. Because let's call a spade, they're both devils, okay? Almost all politicians are devils. They will say whatever they need to say to get your vote. So I don't trust pretty much any of them. But Trump was president, okay? We know exactly what he was like when he was president. Was it so bad? And we knew nothing of Kamala Harris. And worse, she kept changing her mind. She kept changing her position on things, right? On one day, she's for fracking. Another day, she's not for fracking. This and this. One day, she identifies as Indian. Another day, she identifies as black. The reality, she's black and she's Indian. But so this flip-flopping back and forth did not sit very well with a lot of voters. I'm like, well, what does she actually stand for? So my point is, better the devil you know. And this what blows my mind is that, well, in this case, ideology is more important than the person. And then in this case, those that voted for Kamala are voting for the devil they don't know in that case. But look, here's the thing. When it comes to voting, right? And I'm not going to go on about this, but Canada, this is what happened to Canada, and you may not know this. Canada at one point voted for somebody who was not qualified for the job, Justin Trudeau, okay? Justin Trudeau was a drama teacher, had no political experience, had no business experience, zero, but he had a last name because his father was prime minister back in the day. So Canada votes for this guy, and the guy that was the prime minister before ran a surplus government. Can you imagine having a surplus for the country of $2 billion extra in cash? That is insane. Trudeau steps in. 9 years later, the country's in debt by $1.2 billion, okay? So this is an example of somebody getting voted in that does not know what they're doing and is not qualified. So let's get into the 5 reasons why Kamala Harris was not qualified, because I want to make this point, right? And that this whole perceived oppression rather than competence thing, because again, you have a lot of women that say it's because America didn't want a woman president or a woman of color, but it wasn't that at all. So imagine you have 2 resumes in front of you, and forget what Kamala Harris has said in the past or Trump has said in the past. You have 2 resumes in front of you, and you're just looking at credentials specifically, okay? So the 5 reasons why Kamala Harris was not qualified to be president. Number 1, well, she had a terrible performance in the 2020 Democratic primary. Okay, in the primary, this is where Joe Biden ended up being the Democrat nominee. So they're all trying to get the position of the nominee, right? Kamala Harris didn't get a single vote when she ran in the primary. Didn't get a single vote. That's massive, okay? So people say that she was selected, not elected, to be vice president. And in fact, Joe Biden was quoted as saying, "My next vice president will be a black woman." There was no other black women candidates, Democratic candidates that could have been in that role other than her. So she got selected, and this is a perfect example of DEI, all right? So number 2, while she was vice president, she was a failure when it came to the border. And you may argue with me and go, well, not really, but let me leave you with this. Imagine 4 years into the job and you're responsible for the border, and you've only been to the Texas-Mexican border twice. You've only been to the border, and that's your job. That's what you're responsible for twice in 4 years. I'm responsible for trade shows in my work, and we have many trade shows every year. If I only went to 2 trade shows, considering I'm responsible for all trade shows and the budgets, if I only went to 2 shows in 4 years, I'd be fired. So there's an example of how, even as vice president, she wasn't even engaged with her primary role anyways. How could you only go to the border twice and it's a problem? Anyways, moving along. Number three, she was only worth 6 million at the time of the election. Trump was worth 2.5 billion. Why is this important? Because there are only about 1,000 billionaires in the United States, and there's over 1 million people that have a net worth of over 10 million. So Kamala Harris was basically not even in the top 1,000 people in the United States when it comes to net worth. So if she couldn't make a lot of her own money, how could she run a country? Now, remember, being president is the top position in the country. You're running a country. More important than running a Fortune 100 company, right? So you need to have some financial chops. So Kamala Harris was only worth 6 million at the time, and Donald Trump was 2.5 billion as a comparison, okay? Number four, and I'm going to move along on this one. Number four, this was probably the most important. Kamala Harris never owned or ran a business. Yikes. And yet, she was vying for the top spot in the country to run a country, and she's never owned a business or run a business. Donald Trump, on the other hand, owns hundreds of companies in real estate, hospitality, golf licensing, and other types of businesses, okay? Hundreds. Number five, which is probably the biggest one, is sure, Kamala Harris was a U.S. Senator and Attorney General, but yet she never, underlined, had any municipal or state financial budget management authority. She never ran budgets. She never managed budgets. So imagine, she's never run a company, never owned a company. As Attorney General and Senator, she never actually managed any kind of budgets. How could she possibly manage the billions and billions of dollars of budgets in the United States as president? So I'm not going on about, oh, this is why you should have voted Trump or Harris. None of that. I'm just speaking facts. I'm from Canada. I can't vote anyways, but it was very fascinating watching the election and some of my friends or conversations with women. And I'm like, so what do you think about the upcoming election? And then they'd say, oh, I'm voting for Harris. And I'd say, okay, great. What has she accomplished? Like, name three things that she accomplished. And blanks can't specifically say, because they got wrapped up in ideology, right? And this is my point, is that the feminists want you to believe that Kamala Harris lost because of oppression and not competence. And I'm only just scratching the surface on the things that I mentioned. But I was seeing this and I was thinking, man, if I had two resumes, love them or hate them, better to go with the devil you know than the devil you don't know. Because even with that, like I said, those things that I pointed out, that she wasn't qualified for the job, okay? And last but not least is criticism of feminism equals the hatred of women. Yeah. So all three of these authors, again, authors Phyllis Chesler, Christina Hoff Sommers, and Sheila Marston, stress that questioning feminism can actually be pro-truth and pro-women, not the hatred of women. And that's what I want to leave you with in this video. And I didn't do this video because I hate women. Not at all. I love women. But what I don't like is I don't like being labeled as a misogynist, or that I hate women because I'm just pointing out some facts that are constructive criticism on some of the ideology and where things are going, right? And like I said, misogyny is no longer specifically just the hatred of women. It means anything that you say, if it's negative about women or negative about feminists, you're a misogynist. And ultimately, the reason why women say that is because they're trying to beat you down, they're trying to remove your power and take any advantage you might have as a man. All right. Thank you so much for watching. This was one of my longer ones, but it was a lot to go through. So I appreciate your time and effort. All right, man. We'll see you next time.